In the Bible, in the Old Testament as well as the New Testament, Christ was recognized to be the Prince of Peace. He was never to be recognized as the promoter of war. And he even said, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be the children of God. He never said, blessed are the war makers. It was the peacemakers that we must honor and protect.
Well, thank you very much. A few years ago, when Time magazine decided to include me in in its list of the top 25 evangelicals, a lot of evangelicals were very sure this was a mistake. First, that I would be included in the term evangelical at all, and second, that I would be considered influential in any way. But I think my inclusion was an attempt to redress the problem that we're talking about today. The need to break media stereotypes that equate religious with conservative. I do come from an evangelical background, and perhaps of all backgrounds, it is the most deserving of being associated with a conservative stereotype. But I am an example of a growing shift from the monopoly of the religious right on a conservative ethos. And in fact, I think I'm an example that monologue and domination by the religious right is actually becoming a fact of history rather than contemporary news. There's a broader conversation emerging even among evangelicals, and this new conversation can't be fit into the old Cold War categories of right versus left, Republican versus Democrat, liberal versus conservative. I've spoken in over 20 countries in the last 18 months, and everyone around the world who keeps track of American religious life knows names like Jerry Falwell, Pat Robertson, James Dobson. They all have heard of the Left Behind novels. But they're very surprised to hear that in many ways these names represent a kind of outgoing tide and an aging and I think increasingly fragmenting demographic. And that these A-listers who are the media go-to people do represent one segment of evangelicalism and American religious life, but it is a disproportionately represented sector, as this study makes clear. I'm quite certain, based on my travels abroad and here in the U.S., that even among evangelical Christians, the number of progressive issues are going to be rising in importance, and that old assumptions about voting blocks and all the rest are going to fade quite quickly, including, I think, even in the next this election cycle. I think progressive issues from genocide in Darfur to global climate change, from the extinction of species to fair trade and ethical buying, from bonded labor and exploitive employment practices to political corruption, from the need to replace preemptive war doctrine with developing creative peacemaking strategies, and from the growing gap between rich and poor in income, consumption, education, healthcare, and access to the digital world, to a whole range of other issues that aren't included in the short list of, quote, conservative issues. We're going to find evangelicals, and especially younger evangelicals, paying a great deal of attention to these issues. In the United States, I speak frequently to evangelical, mainline, and Roman Catholic groups, and I am certain that a new spirit is in the air. If under the banner of Roman Catholic we can include both Bill O'Reilly and Senator Kennedy, I think we've got to get used to the fact that under other categories like evangelical, there is a far broader range of voices than many of us are paying attention to. Maybe I could say it like this in closing. If you all were pop culture reporters and you were asked to be reporting on the latest in rock and roll, and you kept talking about Bobby Sherman, the Mamas and the Papas, the Bee Gees, the ABBA, Boy George, and Kurt Cobain, I think we would tell you to change radio stations and get out a little bit more. And I think writers on religion and American life similarly need to realize that the landscape has changed. It's time to update the Rolodex, to check out groups like the Red Letter Christians, groups like Sojourners Call to Renewal, groups like Emergent Village, and others, so that when you think of Jim, you don't stop with Dobson, but that you also include people like Reverend Jim Forbes, who is up next to share with us.
midterm elections coming and control of Congress up for grabs, we'll be covering this important story from all different angles. Tonight, a look at one of the most powerful political forces, evangelical Christians. Many people might assume all evangelicals are conservative Republicans and speak with one voice. But more and more, this is a group that is branching out in different directions. National correspondent Byron Pitts now with Eye on Faith.
I want to announce tonight that the monologue of the religious right is finally over.
Author and preacher Jim Wallis calls himself a progressive evangelical who says Christians should focus on injustice around the world.
With 30,000 children dying every day needlessly from poverty and disease, I can't imagine Jesus thinking the top issue on our agenda ought to be gay marriage amendments in Ohio.
Tony Perkins is a Christian conservative.
I think more and more people are standing on our side, on the side of the sanctity of human life, the preservation of marriage.
Perkins is president of the politically powerful Family Research Council. He argues abortion and gay marriage are the driving concerns for most evangelicals.
I don't mind having these debates, because when the truth is on your side, you ultimately win.
The country is hungry for a politics of solutions and a politics of hope.
Wallace says he's against abortion, but argues the agenda of the religious right is too narrow and divisive.
So is yours a new movement or an old movement that's new again?
The evangelists were abolitionists. They led the battle against slavery. They were revivalists and reformers. They fought for women's suffrage. They fought for child labor law reform. I want to build the same kind of social movements today. That means global poverty. It means Darfur. It means HIV/AIDS. It means global warming.
In the last presidential election, 78% of white evangelicals voted for President Bush. So now we're seeing more and more Democrats, from Barack Obama to Hillary Clinton, talking about their faith in issues like poverty and the environment.
I think it's a hunger for a new moral center. Don't go left, don't go right, go deeper.
Liberal Christians are not cohesive. They can't agree on anything.
I could hear folk on both sides saying, you know, you are advocating fence-straddling religion.
This is not a mushy political middle or center. The hunger, though, is for a moral center where we find the moral choices and challenges that lie right beneath our political debate.
People are going to have to stand on one side or the other. These are decisions that you can't stand in the middle.
You consider Jim Wallis an extreme?
Yeah, I consider him to be on the left. I'm no more extreme on the right than he is on the left. I mean, he's out there.
He believes that he is square dab in the middle.
Well, you know what's in the middle are usually dead cats and skunks that have been run over. That's what's usually in the middle of the road.
So how many of you tonight will commit to praying?
And so the debate continues.
We've had too much bad religion.
Perhaps coming to a church near you. Byron Pitts, CBS News, Seattle.
Hi, I'm Dr. Peter Enns. I'm Senior Fellow in Biblical Studies at the BioLogos Foundation, and we're here today with the Reverend Dr. Tom Wright, and we have a chance to ask some questions, some of which we've gotten via Twitter and emails, and also about a lot of topics such as his recent book, After You Believe, and science and faith issues. So welcome, Tom.
Thank you.
In evangelical Christianity, this is another email question that we received. There seems to be a great suspicion about becoming too liberal, but not about becoming too conservative. There seems to be a slippery slope argument towards the left, but not towards the right. And as a result, this questioner states that the left side of the evangelical spectrum may be tempted to leave or perhaps be silent and have no influence. Do you wish to comment on that?
It's very interesting because, of course, in America, the spectrum of liberal conservative theology tends often to sit rather closely with the spectrum of left and right in politics. In England and in many other parts of the world, that simply isn't the case. In England, you'll find that people who are very conservative theologically, by what we normally mean conservative, in other words, believing in Jesus, believing in his death and resurrection, believing in the Trinity, are often the ones who are in the forefront of passionate and compassionate social concern of a sort which, were you to transplant it to America, people would say, oh, that's a bit left-wing. And so I think what I want to do is to uncouple some of the connections which people have routinely made, particularly in America, and to say actually the whole idea of a spectrum, whether it's theological or political, is probably very misleading, because there are all sorts of insights that we need, and we need to get them from bits of the Bible we don't normally expect, and perhaps from people and bits of the church we don't normally expect. And that is something that a robust faith that is firmly rooted in God, in the Trinity, in Jesus, in the Holy Spirit, ought to be able to take on board. Otherwise, what we're doing is substituting our framework and then judging people according to where they are in our framework, rather than something which is actually the given at the heart of our faith.